Survivor Specialist Phil and Alexa are back with another episode of our Ultimate Survivor season. We are down to 12 players, and tonight we're going to be talking about Mutiny from Survivor Cook Islands, the episode that made Candice Woodcock / Cody a hero of all things. Although, wow, I am still confused. We'll be talking about that one. It gave birth to the Aitu 4, a little bit different because I really enjoy this episode. I really like this episode, but this episode is much more of a setup episode for epicness that is to come because Cook Islands is an up and down season. It is all over the place, but what it is best remembered for is the I-2-4 and the fact that Candice and Jonathan stepped off that mat to go join the losers over at Raro. Alexa, when was the last time you watched Mutiny?
I actually don't think I've watched it. I watched it live, and then when I joined this podcast and you were like, you should watch every season, that was also the last time I watched it. I've been rewatching Cook Islands recently, but we've been moving at an extremely slow pace. Which is the case for the pre-merge of Cook Islands. And so we have not made it this far yet, but rewatching this, it makes the Candice decision moving forward makes no sense ever. Maybe she's a hero because the poor thing has almost died on Exile Island. And it also makes no sense why Jonathan mutinied. It seems like he just wanted something fun to do.
I feel like Jonathan, spur of the moment, did it. I think again, he says it a couple times in this episode, but I think he thought he was so close with Candice. I think what worried him is what if they're lying to him and they decide, hey, Ozzy's actually pretty strong. He's not going to be able to break up Becky, Sundra, and Yul. And I think that's what worried him. I don't think he felt as close to Yul as he did to Candice. And I think he was worried that Yul was really close to Becky. And unfortunately, Becky pretty much doesn't talk on this entire season and is one of the more boring players on the season. But I think that's why Jonathan ultimately steps off, is because all of a sudden he looks and like his closest ally, or at least who he believes is his closest ally, just stepped off the mat, and now all of a sudden he's in panic mode. And I think Candice stepping off when Jeff says 2, it only gives Jonathan about a second and a half to decide what he's going to do. And so I don't fault him, although I think that probably immediately after he did it, he probably very much regretted it.
Yeah, I think so too. And you see this happen when Parvati's like, oh my God, I'm so glad you're back. What's up with Jonathan? And Candice just immediately throws him under the bus. So I think, to defend Candice, which is not something I do very often, at least she definitely had guaranteed people over there. Jonathan, I think at this point in the season, really just doesn't have anybody guaranteed. So still makes sense why he would make that jump. But at least Candice is moving into an area where she will definitely have some form of alliance.
Well, and I think, Jonathan, it does make sense. And even though it doesn't play out this way, it should have played out this way, and it should have been the I-2-4 versus the Raro white people. Like, that's kind of how it played up, was the foursomes. You know what I mean? So I think even Jonathan says it in this episode. He wants the 4 Caucasians at the end.
Which is so tough.
Which is so tough, but at the same time, Survivor, way to put a tribe of white people and a tribe of black people, Hispanic. Like, it's awful.
For what it's worth, I watched the premiere of this within the past 3 months, and the Caucasian tribe handled this about as well as they were handed. Like, they handled it pretty darn tough. Even Parvati was like, excuse me. Like, they handled it pretty darn well.
What's funny to me is that you get the wrong group here, and that tribe could just be canceled even back in 2006 or whatever it was. But actually, you could make the argument that the original Caucasian tribe is one of the most popular tribes in the history of Survivor because it has Parvati, Candice, and Jonathan Penner. And between the three of them, what is that, 11 or 12 times playing the game of Survivor? It's a lot of Survivor being played from 3 people on a 5-person tribe to start. So not bad. But all of that's to say, I think that this should have been played up more as a showdown of the 4 Caucasians versus the I-2-4, and the other 3 people, the other 4 people really were just left out. Nate and Brad and is it Rebecca? I don't even know. They were just, and Jenny, I guess. They were just screwed. They had no shot. I don't think that was played up as much because I think Jonathan was just such the punching bag of this season that you always had to keep him on the bottom and couldn't show any control. But this seemed like Brad was always going to be the boot. It seemed like everything else was a red herring. And it seems like as Survivor history's moved on, Penner didn't really shoot himself in the foot until he completely jumped over with Yule, screwed over the Caucasian Four. That's what it is now, people.
Doesn't go well anyway. Yeah.
Screws the Caucasian Four. And then that was the end of him, because then he ends up going out pretty unceremoniously, because the four that he said, I want this to be our final four, he was the one who wasn't able to keep them strong because he got scared of Yule's idol. Although, based on having met Penner and based on knowing Penner's personality, maybe he really just wanted to stir the freaking pot.
Yeah, and I think I think this is why Penner is so likable. I think he's somebody who enjoys Survivor and wants to do something different. And obviously, this is his first showing, but I think this shows his passion for the game, because he's not settling no matter what. Maybe things would be different if he was super tight with the original Aitu crew. But I think you make a good point that this episode feels less so like Penner saved himself and more so like Brad really screwed himself.
Mm-hmm.
Brad, I know we're only watching these like in a vacuum, but Brad, I feel like, was doing fine until he made no attempts to make other people feel like they could trust him. And I think he really sorry, something just happened. I don't really know what. I think at Tribal Council, when he says like, I don't trust anybody, then that's obviously the decision's already made, but it's very clear that he has no problem even saying that in front of people.
Well, and he's playing, and at the time, see, I always think it's funny because Candice is boring in every season except for Blood versus Water. And I think the only reason she's not boring in Blood versus Water is because she's so loud and vocal and all of that. But mainly because she gets voted out right away. And therefore she has to be loud and vocal and all that crazy stuff. But we don't know at the time how good at the game Parvati is. Mm-hmm. We are getting zero from Parvati really on this season. Up to this point, she starts to come out a little bit more later on in the season when she tries to work over Ozzy and Yule. But up until this point, we really don't have much on her at all. But it's funny because in the moment when Brad says, then it's every man for himself, Parvati does what she does in every single other season she plays on. She immediately starts being like, can you believe he said that? And then gets everybody else worked up while she just stands there and is like, I can't believe he said that. I just can't believe, even though she really doesn't care, she gets everybody else so worked up about it. And so we see that happen with Brad here, but we don't know in 2006 what Parvati is actually going to be like come 2010. We have no idea how her arc is going to go and how much pull she might have had in Brad going home in this episode.
Yeah. And she's very, like, dare I say, completely irrelevant in this episode. Like, she's very quiet. This episode is a very Penner heavy episode for me. I feel like as we've watched each of these, every single time we've been like, oh, I forgot this happened in that episode. And for me, this was when Penner pleases Jeff during the challenge. Like that, I think this is the first Penner clapback of an arc that we will get for 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, he does it all the time because he can't handle Jeff trolling, and when he does that,
you gotta be able to take it.
And then Jeff just says, "What does he say?" And now Penner getting mad at me,
getting frustrated by me, and yeah, I think this is when Jeff really starts to like get in his groove too, because he's like, "Yeah, I'm the boss here."
Well, and I think that was kind of necessary because I think in All Stars, Jeff got walked over, and then the whole Vanuatu thing with Chris and Julie, you know, it's like we don't really know what happened, but he had like a weird dynamic there. Palau was kind of weird because there were things that happened without him, and that was kind of strange. You know, like the whole marooning thing. I know he shows up very briefly, but they kind of let that game play out a little bit more organically. With Guatemala bringing players back again, and then it's like, is this Jeff's show or is this the character's show? Panama, he had no control, I feel, over that cast because you had crazy people like Courtney and Shane and all of that. And I think Cook Islands really was like, he was now so confident that he could handle any of them. The fact that he had gotten through Panama, the fact that he had gotten through returning player seasons, he'd gotten through these captain type seasons. Now I think that he just felt like, yeah, this is my show. I can do whatever I need to do. Jeff and Penner going at it is amazing TV every single time. It's so much fun to watch the two of them go head to head because we see it in was it Fans versus Favorites when Penner infamously screams out my ass and Jeff's just like, do better. It's not my problem.
Yeah. Yeah. He's like, it doesn't even make sense, which is why it's so good. But in this challenge also, this is one of the very few challenges where a contestant breaks it pretty much. And Yule knows like to look directly into the hole that they're dropping the cannonball rather than what Survivor provided them with because of the current. I mean, you're watching in the water, it doesn't work. And I can't really tell. Jeff is really stoic, but I also don't think Jeff is crazy about this.
Well, I think nowadays we've seen so many challenges broken, but I think that they always kind of take into account that it could be broken. They're okay with the fact nowadays if you can figure out if you know the pattern to a slide puzzle, good for you. You did your homework before you came out. If you can figure out how to beat a system, that one where you have to throw it up on top of the pole, if you can figure out that Scott Pollard can dunk it up there, great. Good for you. You broke the game. But back then, they weren't used to people breaking the challenges like this. And I think that it did probably piss Jeff off, but it's brilliant by Yule because what they were doing totally wasn't working because the arrow had to be lined up with the arrow. The target just couldn't be lined up with the target because the front of your boat would be facing the other way. Like that is a very precise challenge. That is a very tedious challenge. We had just seen in the reward challenge early in this episode how strong those currents could be if you're not holding on to the rope. So that is so difficult. And for Yule to just break it, it's like, yeah, Ozzy is known as the challenge beast on this season, but Yule's tribes do very well at tribe challenges throughout. Yeah, half the season he's with Ozzy, but Ozzy is the only member of his original tribe who makes the merge. So Ozzy wasn't as good in the team challenges as the individual ones, whereas I think Yule was able to kind of figure out these team challenges a little bit better than some of the other people. And it ends up working out really, really well because, while everybody else is complaining, they got out to an early start. Yule figured out, hey, if I can just look right through here, we do it real quick, we're going to get it every single time. And I don't think he missed after that.
Yeah, I don't think he did either. And this is like a great microcosm of his game where he says it and the group follows. And it's not like bossy, it's not in a Boston Robbie kind of way. He's just so smart that people just know that it's going to be right. And you kind of like wait for there to be an ego battle between him and Ozzy, and it never quite gets there because Ozzy is somebody who is loyal, maybe to a fault. And I know people are like kind of hot and cold on Ozzy. I really liked him, but when they win that reward challenge and he walks by him and he's like, mutinies are the first people to die, I was like, well, he's nothing if not dramatic.
Right? Not just a little dramatic, huh?
Yes.
No, and I always like that though, because I think Ozzy and Yule get along better than Ozzy and JP did because I think Yule isn't seen as much of a threat to Ozzy. Ozzy and JP were very similar. They're both physical. They start off on the same tribe. Yule, while a physical specimen, no doubt, I think Ozzy saw him as more of a cerebral threat than as a physical threat. And so he was more worried about JP early in the season and had more feuding with him. And I also think it just came down to the fact that Ozzy had no numbers. The person who benefited most from this mutiny was Ozzy. And there's always that argument in Survivor. Is it actually sometimes better to lose challenges and weaken people and whatever? When the mutiny happens, it becomes 8-4. But because these challenges have to be run 4-on-4, Aitu is the better tribe by a landslide. Like by a landslide. Because while the other tribe is going to have to sit out somebody good in every challenge. Because remember, at this point, Parvati was a boxer. Candice was very physical. You had Nate, Adam, and Brad all on one tribe. You can't even play all 5 of them in the same challenge, and you'll never be able to because the other tribe is down to 4 people. So what had happened was you essentially made it Aitu versus 2 different tribes because whoever played in the reward challenge couldn't play in the immunity. So it was like 2 different tribes over on Raro, and the I-2-4 is probably, and I mean, Sandra and Becky don't get any credit really, but they are incredibly strong in the challenges and do what they need to do. They don't mess it up pretty much. And therefore, that could be one of the strongest foursomes ever. And who cares if you're up against 8? They can't play all 8 of them.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up Sandra because I know we talk about Becky being really forgettable, but she is like doubly as forgettable. But yeah, you're right. I mean, and this is unfortunately, this is the point in Survivor where women aren't amazing at challenges. They're either a net neutral or a net negative, unfortunately. So for them to be net neutral and to like navigate the Yul and Ozzy relationship, it's a very odd group of four, and it's not who I'd expect to be like the most successful group of four out there. But really, they kind of have to be. I think they have to be the best foursome to play Survivor.
Yeah, I mean, I really think so. I mean, obviously Becky and Sandra don't do them any favors by not being able to make fire at the end. But if you ignore that and you just look at what they're like as a tribe, you know, like if you don't look at the merge and what happens at the merge and everything after that, because we all know that they end up running it. But if you look at the two sets, whatever you want, the two cycles that they are a tribe of four, I would put them up against any group of four. They're better than the Phoba four. You know, they're stronger than them, I believe, because they all played their part. Ozzy could be the best physical player of all time. Yul could be the best strategic player of all time. Becky and Sandra didn't have to be special. But if they were special, it actually might have gotten in the way. It actually might have been worse if it was Candice who stayed and Becky who left, because Candice might not have been able to just kind of sit back and let Yul and Ozzy just completely take over the way Becky and Sandra are able to let happen. Bad for winning Survivor for sure, but really good for surviving those parts of the game that you need to survive early on.
Yeah, I mean, good for making it to the final four. I mean, I think we and so many fans like knock people for not playing to win, but sometimes playing to be a part of the pack is good at different phases. And obviously this, you know, them being a group of four it's completely necessary. It's the only way that any of them are going to survive. And I think they all realize that, even though they weren't, you know, when it was Candice and Jonathan, they weren't that tight as the 4 out of the 6.
No, and I think that this was really then the first time that it started to prove that you could lose everything in Survivor. But once idols came into play, you always had a chance to turn those numbers, because just the season before this, we see Terry and those guys lose the numbers and not be able to do anything. But we see Terry be able to get really far in the game despite all of that, because of his idol, because of his immunity challenge run. Like, we see all of that happen. But it still didn't prove like, hey, we're down in numbers, you're done. You lose, you're down 6-4, you're gone. You know, he got lucky. He kept surviving. He had the idol. This one, though, you're down 8-4. Now it's 6-4 at the merge, and you're able to change those numbers and keep your people intact. We then see this again in Samoa. We see this somewhat in Fiji with the smaller numbers with Earl and Yao-Man. I'm mixing Yul and Yao. Earl and Yao-Man, we see them together be able to kind of not have the numbers, but still navigate the 4 horsemen and all of that craziness, and use dreams and Cassandra and how do we get through the game. You start to see now in Survivor, and I think Mutiny is actually an incredibly important episode, because it proved that even if you're down 4 people at one point on your tribe, in these days where the jury can start at 12, the merge can start at 12, the merge can start at 13, it does not mean it's over, because idols are in play. And all you got to do is survive, because with Ozzy winning pretty much every physical immunity challenge, individual immunity challenge post-merge, and Yul having that super idol, nobody's targeting Becky or Sandra. And now all of a sudden, it's not so hard to flip those numbers.
Yeah. And actually, to pivot a little bit, this is one of, I don't know how many seasons actually happens, but one of the few seasons where we have a jury member who has not made the merge yet. And I can't remember if the next episode is the merge or not. I assume it is, because it's not, because
it goes to 10. I don't think they merge until 10. I think Jenny or Rebecca goes home next.
I think Rebecca and then Jenny. So there's 3 tribe members, or there's 3 contestants who make it to the jury before the merge happens. And it's definitely like, it's weird, because we're 13 seasons in where people kind of know when it merges, and they actually talk about it a few times this episode, but there's nothing definitive yet. And I don't really love when people are on the jury but haven't made the merge, but maybe because the tribes have been switched around so many times that it, you know, it works in this instance.
Well, and I think it's interesting to do it this time. So this was the first time that it ever happened because remember in the season before this, Nick didn't make the jury despite making the merge, and that had kind of been the norm for Survivor. Brandon and Nick, and you're missing out on some people. I always feel like if you make the merge, you should make the jury. If you make the jury, you should also make the merge. Like those two things should go together.
Symbiotic.
But I do think this was an interesting time to try it because it was coming on the heels of this mutiny. And the fact that the mutiny does happen. Oh, and Gamer Girl says merged at 11 this season. They split the teams in two, and Rebecca and Jenny got the dumb bottle twist. I forgot about that.
Bottle twist.
And that also will help you come back from an 8-4 deficit.
Seriously.
But I think this was a cool one to do it because Brad saw the mutiny happen. And so because Brad saw the mutiny happen, he gets to go on the jury despite not making the merge and still know where everybody stands. And does he respect the fact that Penner and Candice mutinied? Does he respect the fact that the 4 who were mutinied on are able to come back? I think it's an interesting time to do it. In Heroes Villains, I think it's an interesting time to do it. They all know who each other are. It doesn't matter. But in like an Edge of Extinction, that's stupid. You know what I mean? Like there has to be good reason for it. I'm always better with somebody making the merge and not making the jury than making the jury but not making the merge. I do think Cook Islands was an interesting time to try it though. And Thailand doesn't really count because the thing with Aaron and Ken is just like, that was the merge.
It was weird.
Yeah.
Okay, so another thing I have on this episode, I feel like whenever people talk about Cook Islands, this person comes up, but Nate Gonzalez is so awesome. This is also the episode where he talks about chopping people up like poop, which makes no sense to this day. I think if somebody asked Nate, he wouldn't know, but he is just such a fun character. And I'm not in the camp of like everyone should return because maybe he doesn't want to, but weirdly enough, like he is kind of the life of this season until he goes home. It's not Parvati. It's not Candice. He's like kind of the narrator too. I think he almost rivals Penner as a narrator here.
Yeah, I love Nate. I think the biggest problem was they didn't do a full All-Star season at 16.
Yeah.
They needed to do a full All-Star season and do 20 people because the fact that Johnny Fairplay didn't play on All-Stars but was willing to come back for fans versus favorites ripped someone out of the mix. You gotta remember, Terry doesn't play again. Shane doesn't play again. You know, you have a lot of, what was that?
I was going to say, yeah, man, but he does.
He does, yeah, barely. But you have a lot of people who don't play again that should have played again at that point, but got cut because of, and then I think the other issue was it was still a time in Survivor when it was one black man, one black woman. Well, now you have Sari and you have James. Nate's not more popular than James, and if that's how they're viewing it, Nate has no chance of getting on season 16, which is a bummer. But James is the better character. But if they had done a full All-Star season, I think Nate for sure would have been in the mix for it because Nate was such a likable character, such a likable person. And then it really just comes down to now we see Survivor saying, more diversity, more diversity, more diversity. Unfortunately, during season 13, their idea of more diversity was just, label their tribes, their skin color. And then after that, they kind of moved away from it because, season 14 is a diverse cast. Season 15 is James and Sharia and PG. Yeah. It's not, there's not much going on there. So I think that was one of the big problems for Nate was just that it was a half All-Star season. And when you look at the men who are on that season with Penner, Fairplay, James, Ozzy, and Yowman, that's a great set. And I think what hurts him too is that Ozzy and Penner are both from his season.
Yeah, that's true. There's no one to replace there. And then he's not going to be a hero or a villain. Mm-mm. So there's just never really the opportunity. But I think what's cool about him is he probably is like, if we're going to do like labeling heroes and villains, he's actually probably a villain, but it's kind of like the Malcolm effect where he's so likable and he always delivers things with a smile, but he's always trying to vote people off. He's is the reason that Stephanie goes home because she wants mashed potatoes. Like he plays a pretty good game and he just does it with a smile on his face the whole time, which is always fun.
Yeah, he really does. And he's always one of those people that always surprises me when I watch Cook Islands because you
Mhm.
do forget about him. Because people will bring him up in the community, but you kind of forget what he did. You know, it's is he just being overblown because people just now in retrospect have decided to love him. But every time I watch this season in full, I always love him. And I do think that even just watching this one episode, him, Penner, Candice, and Yule are pretty much the stars of this episode. That's pretty good stars. I mean, and he
Yeah.
holds his own with all of them and might surpass all of them if it wasn't for Penner doing his weird things with Jeff where he just insults him and stuff.
Yeah. Which is what makes this season so weird. It is like obviously like the returning players are really great. The players, a lot of the players who don't return are also really great. And yet this season is both universally loved but also universally boring. I can't really think of another season like it.
Cook Islands is the most bizarre Survivor season in terms of like
Yeah.
where do you rank this? It always lands smack in the middle of my rankings because it has Parvati, it has Candice, it has Yule, it has Ozzy, it has Penner. Okay, and then it also has Nate who doesn't play again. Adam Gentry is entertaining as all
He's
hell.
great.
Flicka is entertaining. Cowboy is entertaining. The problem is, though, beyond that, once you start looking at who the players I didn't just name are, I don't think that there's ever been a cast in the history of Survivor that has been so top heavy and also so bad at the bottom. There's so much at the top, but there's no middle tier characters on this season. I think that's what makes it a really hard season.
Yeah, and this actually seems to have like the complete opposite Ghost Island effect, where it is a brutal pre-merge. There is nothing interesting going on in the pre-merge. And the post-merge is exciting because the underdogs are winning, but it's almost in a way like you almost know that they're going to get there. You almost know that they're going to win. So the pre-merge is terrible, and then you do get a pagonging just in a kind of different way. And then it's kind of the Dom and Wendell where it's like, yay, which of the two is going to win? But I'm so bored by everything else.
And I think Cook Islands, while the pre-merge doesn't really have many memorable people, I do think there's enough memorable moments because of the cowboy thing, because of JP and Ozzy going at it, because of Billy Garcia. There's enough in there that at least will hold you over. It's not great. And you can barely name anybody on that pre-merge. Like, it's crazy, like, how you'll just forget, oh, who finished 17th? Like, when you said Stephanie today, I was like, what?
Yeah.
Who? But then you still have Rebecca in the game, and you forget Rebecca's there. Jenny doesn't do much in this season. It's all over the place. But there's no middle tier. It's all, here's your top-notch Survivor narrators, players, characters, and here's your bottom tier. How the heck did they ever get on the show? When you have that much disparity, you kind of need somebody to kind of mesh it together that we can all feel indifferent towards, and you don't have that on this season.
No, not at all. It's a very weird season. And I think putting it in the middle of the rankings is probably safe, but I get why people do rank it really high too.
Yeah, and Cecilia and Christina, Gamer Girl just did it.
Like, who?
Cecilia and Christina, like, what?
Like, absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. And it's interesting. I mean, it's very weird how that plays out because there'll be other older seasons where you can name every single person from the pre-merge. Now, is that because this is a 20-person season? Maybe, but you could pretty much name everybody from the pre-merge of Palau, but maybe that's just because their whole tribe stunk. So I don't know. I don't know what it is that kind of creates this. I don't know, because Cook Islands could be a top 10 season, but it could be a bottom 10 season. Like, it's just.
Yeah, it's a bottom 10 on a
wide
rewatch.
range.
It is an awful rewatch, as I am currently witnessing. I'm sure you're heading there.
Yeah, we've been without Paramount Plus, so I have not been watching the rest of Vanuatu. Yes, I only have it on my laptop, but because my laptop broke, I have like an old 11-inch, and we're not going to watch it on there. So I will have Paramount Plus back tomorrow.
A non-HD season on an 11-inch computer.
Yeah, can't be doing that. Not for the finale of Vanuatu. Yeah, not for Vanuatu's finale. It was okay to watch a Mutiny like that, but to watch Vanuatu's finale like that would be a disgrace.
A disservice to Survivor.
Yeah, so waiting, but I will be back in front of a TV that is large and has Paramount Plus tomorrow. So that is good to know. But yeah, I like this episode a lot. And I think that this is one of the most interesting episodes in Survivor history because it never happened again. It created a lot of BS talking points. It created a hero out of somebody who wasn't a hero. It created a villain out of somebody who wasn't a villain, meaning Penner. And it created like this underdog story for a group of people who really shouldn't have been underdogs at all. Yul and Ozzy should never have been considered underdogs. It created so many weird stories and so many weird dynamics that you just sit there and go, huh, okay, that's Cook Islands, I guess. But it's at Final 12, and it's all because of this little mutiny thing that really, in the grand scheme of things, did almost nothing to change the boot order of this season.
It's pretty interesting that it never happens again. I think there's something telling about that because it does create like a 10 out of 10 storyline. But I know, was it Thailand where they offered the mutinies that we were just talking about? Like,
I think so, yeah.
Did it? Yeah. I'm a little surprised they haven't done it again. Or if anything, I'm surprised they don't do it now because I think current survivors would eat that up.
Well, and I think what the biggest problem is, it's too easy to game because let's say they say, okay, you guys can mutiny. They can only do it at a time where the tribes are even. They have to do it then. So
separate people so they can't make eye contact either.
Well, yeah, and Survivor likes to do it ahead of time to plan this out. So if you want to do it, you can't be like, oh, at Final 12, we're going to do it, and then it's 8-4, so you don't do it. The other problem is they could have just made it a merge. Every single person could have just stepped off the mat and said, hey, let's just merge. And that is probably something that people who are so meta about it would do, which is say, hey, if there's a mutiny, let's all just step off so we can merge.
Yeah. I mean, we're merging at 13 these days. So
yeah. I mean, especially if you have the numbers. If you feel like you're in a good spot, you're up like 8-5 or something at 13, something like that. And you say, hey, let's just if they give us the mutiny, let's step off. It can kind of be like a unfair thing. So I don't know. In all honesty, the mutiny probably doesn't work because nothing really happens to Penner and Candice, and the same people go home that would have gone home anyway. So I don't know how to really take it. I just know that this episode itself is very, very interesting, and kind of like made it's people who say what made mountains out of anthills. This one made mountains out of anthills of anthill kind of characters that ended up becoming mountains, like Candice, and this is probably why Penner plays again.
Yeah, the Candice thing will forever stump me. I know we started with it. It's just I still don't get it.
Watching her confessionals, I'm like, wow, she's boring.
I feel nothing.
Nothing. I know. She's really interesting in Blood versus Water, but the 2 seasons she plays before that, it's just too quiet. It's too monotone. It's too mellow.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. I don't know. Doesn't do it for me, but
Do you have anything else on this episode?
No, I mean, that's kind of what I have about Mutiny. Coming on the heels of Flicka going home, which was coming on the heels, I believe, of Cowboy or Christina or something going home. But Cowboy and Flicka going home in the pre-merge, and Billy. Those are your 3 who could have maybe stirred the pot a little bit if they got to play the game a little bit more. And maybe that would have made the season a little bit more interesting rather than having Brad and Rebecca and Jenny make it far, considering those are 3 straight boots, and we get to know pretty much none of them.
Yeah, those are brutal boots.
And those are your first 3 members of the jury.
Brack doesn't even talk that much during his boot episode.
No. And those are your first 3 members of the jury. That's not good.
Yeah, that's not good at all.
So,
yeah.
All right, Alexa. Well, before we say what we're doing next, it's July, so I'll put the banner up at the bottom. Become patrons, everybody. Patreon.com/Survivor Specialist. We just had our best month ever. We're still doing daily content. We're into season 42 cast breakdown now. But Alexa, what are we doing next week? And while that sits there at the bottom for everybody to stare at.
So next week, we are going to a season that I haven't watched since it was live, and Phil probably hasn't either. We are going to San Juan del Sur. The episode is called Wrinkle in the Plan, and this is the Josh versus Jeremy, the hottest rivalry that lasts 36 hours. And this is our episode 11. So this is I believe this is the merge boot, or it's the second to the merge.
Well, because Julie quit at the actual merge.
Right, and that threw everything off. So I think it'll be a fun one. I think this is probably a very good standalone episode, and it's a lot more Josh and Jeremy focused than it is John and Jacqueline focused, which means it's probably going to be a good one. But as Phil said, go to patreon.com/Survivor Specialists. We are we have never been blessed with two cast reveals going on at the same time. So we've talked about season 41, including the tribe breakdowns. We are starting to talk about season 42 and the tribe breakdowns. I know they had that also. So now is the best time to be a patron. It's only going to continue to get better. So hop on the bandwagon and become a $20 patron.
Yes, and if you're 10 or 5, you're still getting weekly or monthly content. So you still have stuff going on for you there. But $20 patron, best bang for your buck right now, because we're talking all about season 41 and all about season 42, which we don't want to talk about on the channel until it's officially released by CBS. But you can listen to as much as you want us to talk about it over there on patreon.com, because that's all we're talking about. I can't believe that we've uploaded so many videos regarding people that I've never heard speak or seen really at all. So, in fact, Roxroy, I still don't think we've seen. So
we haven't, which is why everyone thinks that person is going to win.
So funny, but it's actually Tommy Sheehan. He likes to call him like The Rock. You know,
he might be just as boring.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm calling Tommy right now. Tell him 35-32, Tommy.
Yeah, 35-32. Remember that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all we got. Become a patron. Go listen to some of our other. If you're just finding us now that you're starting to get excited about Survivor, we did so much stuff in the off season. We talked about Disney movies. John and I are talking about real movies. We did a iconic Survivor thing, which, by the way, iconic Survivor for Final 11. Obviously, the Final 11 episode would have been Head of the Snake, but we just talked about that for Classic Survivor. So we can't talk about it again. That would be dumb. So go listen to that. If you haven't listened to it, you know, we've been tearing through some stuff. We even talked about the challenge, and I hated every single second of it. So if you want to listen to me bitch a lot, that's your spot to go. So if you're just coming over to the channel, go check out all of that. But mainly go to patreon.com/Survivor Specialist and hear Alexa and me talk about people we don't know. That's what we're good at. See you next week to talk about Josh and Jeremy.